Hi, hello everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Food for Fairness Summit here, presented by the Yolo County Food Bank. We're really happy for you to be here. I hope everyone had a wonderful lunch. And here we are for one of our, thank you for joining this panel. And what we're hoping this panel is, we're going to introduce you to culturally appropriate food. So the hope is that we create an understanding of what this culturally appropriate food is. And the big question here is, what is it? And why does it matter? So we have a list of our panelists that will be participating today. We have Kristen Leach. She is owner from Namu Farm. We have Ms. Jessica Hagger. She is a director for healthcare partnerships and nutrition, Feeding America. We have Moa. Is it Moa? I'm sorry, Moa Farms here in Winters, California. And we have Kristen Elliott.
I'm Ghee. My daughter's more. I'm using her computer. I don't have one.
I apologize. We have the wrong name up in your screen. I apologize about that. We had Ghee Moa from Moa Farms here in Winters. She's a local farmer. And we also have Kristen Elliott. She's a nutrition specialist with the Atlanta Community Food Bank. So we're hoping that we start working on a conversation today about culturally appropriate foods, and that we'll have a better understanding of what that is and how it plays a role on each of our organizations. And we wanted just to make sure that we are able to introduce everyone and welcome everyone to this summit, and hoping that we can send you better educated and be able to participate and hopefully introduce a lot more of those culturally appropriate foods. And we want just gonna get going with this. And I wanted to make just a quick introduction with Jessica, and I think we don't want to put you on the spot. We want to just make sure that we introduce you as it covers the whole different organizations in the U.S. But as far I have a little bio on Jessica here, and it's for more than a decade. Jessica has been focused on social determinants of health, namely food security, and currently serves as a director, healthcare partnerships and nutrition at Feeding America. Her work has centered on the development and execution of a national strategy aimed at improving food security through cross-sector partnerships, applied research, and hunger relief sector transformation. She's a proponent and lifelong student of working with communities to eliminate and interrupt systemic barriers hindering humanity's progress to ensure dignity and justice. Ms. Hagger has served as a co-lead to the inaugural diversity, equity, and inclusion planning team of Feeding America, laying a foundation for evaluation and systems level change within the organization. She also serves on the board of directors at Unfleshed, a national nonprofit focused on centering on of marginalized experiences, conversations, and communities. And with that, we'd like to welcome Ms. Jessica Hagger here from Feeding America. And just wanted to get this started. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be with you all today. And I understand there'll be some Q&A. And so Juan, would you like me to jump in and just share a little bit about our work at Feeding America?
Yes, so that's the hope. I want to make sure that we go around the room. We want to make sure that we give everyone a little bit of feedback. We do have some limited time in here, so we'll be able, if there is time, we'd like to take some question and answers from our participants. But in the meantime, we wanted to make sure that you're able to discuss how your organization plays a role in culturally diverse food.
Great. So I'll just share again, it's good to be with you all. So Feeding America, as you may know, is the national network of food banks here in the United States. And we work with 60,000 food pantries. Millions of individuals of our neighbors, family, and colleagues experience food insecurity. And so our job is not only to feed people in the moment through a variety of programs, but and one of my wonderful colleagues, Kristen from Atlanta Community Food Bank is with us, but also to think even further beyond that. What are the reasons why we have food insecurity that exists in the US, and how can we address that? One important area of that I come to is kind of this paradigm shift that food banking has taken over the last 10 years in particular. And that is a recognition that nutritious food, when we say that can oftentimes translate into demonizing food, not respecting different cultures and the food sovereignty of communities. And it always has had a history of looking at the nutrition facts label, which we know is rooted a lot in kind of one-sided kind of research, white supremacy in a lot of ways as we dig into that history. And so Feeding America is really focused on expanding that perspective around what does it mean when we meet the food needs and preferences of our neighbors? It all begins with asking a question, co-creating with community members, and recognizing that the provision of nutritious food goes beyond the nutrition facts label, and is also about understanding one's culture, meeting those cultural needs. And again, as I noted, being co-creators together in the work ahead. So I'll stop there. I know we'll have more time to chat.
Thank you very much for that. So following, I'd like to also introduce Kristen Elliott, who's working with the Atlanta Community Food Bank. And what we have, Kristen, she's a registered dietitian and a nutrition specialist at the Atlanta Community Food Bank. And in this position, she manages educational outreach, resource development, and dietetic interns, and facilitates nutrition and culinary classes, currently virtual. And she also coordinates cultural conversations, monthly meetings of food banks across the network. And Kristen focuses her work in trauma-informed, client-centered service and brings her lived experiences and rural food insecurity to the table as she serves partners and community members. Outside of community work, Kristen is a Capella Fellow working on her MPH. And in her free time, she enjoys tending her many houseplants, experimenting in the kitchen, and enjoying her husband and cat's company. So, Kristen, welcome. So I wanted just to make sure that we were able to touch base and we were able to discuss on how, I know that Atlanta and the different partnerships that you work, how is your organization directly linked with culturally appropriate foods, and what can you tell us about that?
Yes, hi Juan, and hi everyone. Thanks so much for the introduction, and super excited to be here. This is actually my first panel, so this is all new for me. So yes, I've been in Atlanta at the food bank for about 6 years. And I like to say that I accidentally started this cultural conversations work group of food banks across the country who are deep in the work of trying to meet the cultural needs of the people that we're serving. In Atlanta, we are dipping our toes into that work, and I've learned so much from other food banks who have dived a little bit more deeply. But from my perspective, we're currently trying to educate our broader community on the different types of cultures that we're serving. So through social media, we're highlighting different cultural heritage months and making sure that the community knows how diverse the neighbors are that we're serving. And then I also piloted a Spanish language cooking series live on our Facebook page called Come Bien en Casa, which is translated to cooking well at home. We try to incorporate the community aspect of cooking in your kitchen with more than just your immediate family members, which is so prevalent within the Latino community. So we are just getting our toes wet in terms of learning about and teaching the broader community about what it means to be culturally diverse. And we are working on our first steps to start implementing some focus groups through some of our partner pantries who we know serve large pockets of our community members, and we will continue the work from there. But beyond me, other food banks have already created entire programs around this work, having surveyed their community members and also worked alongside other community programs that are already serving the diverse population that they're trying to reach. Thanks, Juan.
Thank you very much for thank you very much for all the work that you do. We would like to touch base a little bit more about the different partnerships or about the different organizations that you work with, and I would love to continue that conversation as we move here through our panel. And I'd like to just move on to Kristen Leach. I want to make sure that we're able to touch base with you as well. So in a conversation, we've heard a lot about you as far as what Namu Farm is doing in the area, but could you tell us a little bit more, or how does culturally appropriate food play a role in your organization and your farm? And we're really happy to have our growers here, and couldn't be happy to have a couple of farmers representing, because this is what it's all about. It's about the products that we grow in the individuals that grow it. So again, how does a culturally appropriate food play a role in your organization?
Yeah, thanks, Juan. I'm happy to be here and it's nice to meet everybody. So I'm a small vegetable grower in Winters, California, which is just near Davis in Yolo County. And I grow predominantly Korean and East Asian herbs and vegetables. And I do commercial seed production for Kitazawa Seed Company, which sells Asian varieties of crops. And we have a program that we started called Seed Stewards, that for us was like both to try to build more participation in seed breeding platforms and have communities really inform breeding objectives through like a cultural lens. But what we really loved about it is we kind of focused on different Asian American communities coming together across generations and across different, lived experiences, immigration status, like how long they've lived in the US, their relationship to living here, and mostly focused all of these conversations around different crops that have been really significant to our respective communities' survivals. And so we always think about it like as a farmer, like what are the seeds that your communities, that your ancestors brought when they were displaced from different homes, when they faced a lot of uncertainty and potentially violence in their reality, like seeds were often just kind of like the lifeline and tether that people could feel comforted by. And I think that speaks a lot to just not just the physical nourishment of these kind of culturally important foods, but also just kind of like the spiritual and ancestral connection of something that feels like the only piece of home that you may be able to take with you, or the only piece of home that you may see in your lifetime. And so with Seed Stewards, we basically worked with a cooperative of small farmers up and down the West Coast to kind of just build a year-long program where each month we focus on a crop or crop family, and a farmer would curate that, and our respective CSAs all joined this online platform to kind of share recipes and stories and memories. So we create this really full picture of all of these different vegetables, with the hope that, for small farms, I think increasingly CSA was a really hard model for us to do, just because there's a lot of other aggregated vegetable boxes that just to scale have logistics that small farms can't run. So we felt like with COVID and having to pivot and a lot of small farms doing these vegetable boxes, why not just take a pause to reflect on like what cooking a meal together should be, and having it not be the bottom line about convenience, but just saying like, if we can curate an experience through this box, if we can create an opportunity for people to connect and share a meal even virtually, can we add a richness to this that isn't about expedience, but it's just like the quality of time spent. So yeah, we have coloring books for kids, and we have virtual potlucks each month, and we have classes that range from cook-alongs and tutorials from chefs that also represent the different backgrounds of our families, as well as farmers kind of showing the growing end of it. So yeah, we're just trying to create like a really rich landscape so that this month we're focusing on bitter melon. And I think a lot of families, if they get that in a vegetable box, it's kind of a hard sell at dinner time to sit a bunch of kids down and feed them an incredibly bitter vegetable, adults too. But we just found that because you have so many families that grew up with this and love it and contextualize it. It's a song in the Philippines called Bahay Kubo, and it talks about all of these Filipino vegetables, including bitter melon. And so now we have families asking for more bitter melon, even mid-week, just because they've run out already and the kids want to try some more of the recipes that we have. So yeah, just really trying to infuse this love of our respective foodways, and just remind our communities that it's more an act of remembering than having to learn. Because I think, as Jessica said earlier, we have this notion of a certain paradigm of whose cultures know how to eat healthy. We have all these public health disparities that affect a lot of communities of color disproportionately. And oftentimes the blame is placed on those communities and on those families rather than kind of more systemic shortcomings. So yeah, I'm just excited to talk with everyone else here, and am glad to have the opportunity.
Wow, I mean that's a lot, and I think this is exactly what we're sitting on this particular panel in order to be able to share the different experiences that we all have in the work that we do. And I think you just touched a lot of different subjects that perhaps a lot of us as working in our own different fields and our organizations perhaps ignore just the availability that we have to food and the access that we have to food. And what we don't always see is the different and the diverse groups, the diverse products that are out in the marketing and how those affect the economic fabric or the social economic fabric that we have in our own communities. And I think that's something that we do that. So thank you very much for sharing that. And we're also going to go to Ghee. So Ghee runs a farm, a Moa farm here as well. So we have her here, and we want to make sure that we're able to share in perhaps some of your experiences as well. And again, the question is why or culture appropriate food, how does it play a role in your organization and what does it mean to you?
I don't know. I don't really know how to express it. Just being a farmer, but I think Kristen pretty much touched a lot of the topic. So as an Asian farmer, I just grow different vegetables that we Asian likes to eat, but I want to share that with the public so that they at least know something that they never see before that their family might like to try. So yeah, I grow different types of vegetable that people might not seen it before, like the snake gourd. It's just like zucchini. It doesn't have any taste to it, but it has strides and it's just really different color, a different fruit, but there's no taste to it, just like zucchini. And yet people wonder, why do I call snake gourd? But as Asians, we always like to, that's a second nature to us. It's a vegetable we live by, we eat it in nature, but for other people, it's different. We like to share that diverse with other people. Yes, something you might not think that it's edible, but in a different parts of the world, it's food for their daily food. So with the diverse vegetable, even we don't have the other, we have the other. So we can supplement that. So it's a unique way of sharing with everybody.
Thank you, Ghee. And I think Kristen brought a really good point as far as the seed program that she's working with and about preserving heritage seeds. And sometimes being the ancestral connections and reminding us of the food that we tried at an earlier age. And I have a quote here from Chef Marcus Samuelson. And I was born in Ethiopia, but he said, I grew up in Sweden in a fishing village. So now when I'm creating menus for my restaurants around the world, I'm often taken back to the flavors of my childhood. So I like just so Chef Samuelson owns restaurants in Harlem, Las Vegas, Bahamas, New York, Canada, Sweden, and Scandinavia. And I see from his background, the way that he phrased that about, around, restaurants around the world, creating those menus for restaurants around the world, how he's taken back to the flavors of that childhood and the impact that it had. So I'd like to probably explore a little bit more on each of us in going around the room and how does, childhood take an impact, or how does that impact the different foods that we eat, and how does that play a role in the organization that we are working with, and how does that drive us to make others understand about the importance of culturally appropriate food. And that's exactly what we wanted to discuss. So Jessica, are you able to touch back on this a little bit as far as the influence that I had? I mean, going back and can develop a little bit more of that, or the experiences that you've had as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just share, I grew up in Texas. So I had the opportunity to grow up with a lot of great Mexican influenced foods. But also my mom is an immigrant from India. So that was part of my food kind of experience as a kid. And at the same time, I had to working parents who, they had jobs that were in the public service industry, nonprofit industry. So we didn't like roll in the dough. So I had a lot of food access. I know I would never experience food insecurity as a child, but we had a lot of food that was Stouffer's lasagna, quick, easy meals. And when my mom could, she would make Indian food. But so I kind of grew up with this mix of a rich historical culture of food when it comes to Indian food, but she would make it the quick way, right? And that I love. And every time I have Indian food now, it's like brings back memories. And it's a food I always gravitate to when I'm stressed. So a lot during COVID times. But then my other food experience, which was more of the daily, was again, these quick meals. I remember we would line up the shopping cart with 2-liter bottles of soda. And that was my drink that I had access to as a kid. I didn't remember really drinking water that much, which now everyone's like, stay hydrated. So I share that because it's really influenced my role at Feeding America, because I carry a lot of hopefully empathy with an understanding that to eat quote unquote healthy, as we talk about often in the US, is not just about access. It is not just about exposure, but there are so many environmental elements, historical elements, access elements, and taste that influence how we are. I mean, I have a severe sweet tooth, and I also still gravitate that. Even in my brain, I know I shouldn't probably have that many sweets all the time, but it's just kind of, I think, part of how I grew up. And then the other story I was actually telling with some of the panelists is my knowledge of a salad up until I met my wife in college was iceberg lettuce, ranch dressing, and tomatoes, none of which I liked. And so I just thought, generally, I do not like salads. I don't eat a lot of vegetables. But my wife was like, I want to make you a salad. And so she put seeds and raisins and mixed greens, never heard of that before, vinaigrette, never heard of that. And I fell in love with salads, and I'll now order them at restaurants. But what that pivot required was someone who I trusted and cared about, wanting to make me something that they loved and that came from their heart and home and history. And so that's what I try to bring into my work, is a sense of respect for other people's stories, whatever that may be, and also my own story, because I feel like we ultimately, right, are all a community and trying to just learn and grow together. So.
How often in your line of work do you find individuals that are sharing the same experiences after years and are still not perhaps not finding the right food for their that they grew up with, that we're trying to provide? And do you think what are the changes that are happening in with Feeding America that are helping to provide those ingredients, or how are we focusing on that?
Great. So I'll kick us that off, and then I'll actually pass it to Kristen, because she's been really doing this work on the ground. So I would say at the national organization level, it's about systems change. So of course, the Feeding America network of food banks the food we have is highly infused by donated food that comes from retail, manufacturers, wonderful farmers. And we've had a huge increase in produce due to great relationships with farmers over the years. What we're now focusing on is how do we work with communities, whether that's through surveying or kind of feedback loops, to understand what the food needs and preferences are, with the recognition that culture informs that, medical diet recommendations require that, access in your geographic community and neighborhood inform that, and how can we help supplement what you don't always have access to, either financially or through other access points within food banks and food pantries through strategic sourcing at the national level. But again, I'll pass it to Kristen, because she's done a lot that is kind of leveraging the work that Feeding America released, a nutrition and food banking toolkit, which I'll post in the chat here, that speaks to how food banks can build capacity and knowledge around intercultural competency when it comes to this work. So Kristen.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I have so many things to share. So as I mentioned before, we are not super deep in this work yet, but I have all of the ideas that all of the other food banks that are using to implement this work. And one of my favorites is the Food Bank of the Rockies. Amanda McGimpsey from there launched a cultural responsive food initiative program, and they were able to start this work using a COVID-19 relief grant. So they were already asking questions and trying to figure out how to communicate directly with community members and how to source the food and how to make sure that internal processes were lining up in relation to cultural foods, as well as everything else that is involved with the metrics of distributing food. So they had 3 main objectives for their program. And so first they wanted to gather feedback about cultural foods directly from their community members. And they wanted to streamline their internal workflow and develop new metrics that will sustain this culturally responsive work after the grant is over. And then their last objective was to strengthen their existing partnerships with already community programs that are already serving the diverse community members. So that is one thing that I've heard from every food bank doing this work is they are starting by talking to the people who are already directly connected with our community members. So like for us in Atlanta, we have the Latin American Association, and there is a version of that program across every state in the country. So we should start with who our community members are already trusting, because we have to realize that as a large food bank or even as an individual food pantry, we may not ever be that actual supportive, trusted bridge that our neighbors are looking for. We should start by talking to the people that they already trust. So that is a huge component of it. Food bank, the food bank of, oh my goodness, I just drew a blank. It's in Virginia, Blue Ridge Food Bank. One thing that they did is they surveyed 50 community programs outside of their own food bank to understand what it is that they're currently doing, so they're not repeating some of the same types of services. So they got a good baseline of information before they even started trying to create something of their own. And I like to always think that there's already someone doing this work somewhere, so you don't have to start from scratch or reinvent the wheel. There's a place that you can reference, and then you can modify to make it fit the specific cultures you're serving, or even, for example, like within the Latino culture, there are so many different countries, and their cultural preferences are going to be different, even across cities or even across households, because your grandma maybe cooks something differently. So it really is important to know specifically what is going on within your community.
That's awesome. That sounds like great programs, and it seems like it's a lot of work and a lot of great ideas. I really like the fact that you mentioned about working with different organizations and surveying those different organizations to do like that needs assessment. And I'm a firm believer of if you build it, they will come if we build it right. And I think that's what we're seeing here, those different organizations working together in order to provide a service to the public and be able to better serve our community. I'd like to hear a little bit from our farming experts here and see how they're playing a role in what needs have you seen in your individual communities that have been able to either be fulfilled, or what programs you think perhaps could work in our region in order to bring those culturally appropriate foods. Probably, I mean, either Kristen or Ghee. I mean, if you want to just jump in. All right, I think both of you are muted, FYI. But Kristen, I see
okay,
you're.
I can go. Yeah, I really appreciated what and Kristen just shared. I think, you know, Kristen's point of just the trust that's needed and not thinking we have to reinvent the wheel, and like already looking for where communities are putting in that effort and using kind of institutional and system power to like lift up those efforts just feels so significant. I mean, when I moved to the Bay Area, like 12 or 13 years ago, I worked with an organization that was trying to do, you know, like all the buzzwords like food justice and a food desert in West Oakland with, you know, mostly teenagers, like Black and South Asian teenagers. And when I got there, you know, like the staffing, like really, no one really understood. No one was coming from those communities or similar backgrounds. And I remember the director just really griping to me like, oh, we can't get these kids to like eat kale to save their lives. I'm like, okay. And, you know, the first meeting we had with them, you know, I asked them kind of like what Jessica said, like, what is, you know, what's a memory of like a food that was prepared for you where you felt really cared for, where that dish was something that made you know that the person making it loved you. And all of them across like these different communities came, like, I think probably 95% of them said collard greens. And I was like, okay, like, why are you insisting they eat kale when collard greens is like pretty much the same thing? I was like, it's even more nutritious than the dino kale that you're so enamored with. And it just kind of gets into this rut of like, yeah, they're not talking about like grandma's kitchen in Provence, you know, like they're talking about just grandma opening up a can of collard greens. But why not start from the part that feels like nostalgic? Why not start from the part that tells them that, yeah, there are vegetables they're familiar with. There's vegetables that have like fed their family through generations. Yeah, rather than this kind of like condescending, really paternalist approach. So I'm just really glad to hear that in terms of what the work everyone's doing here is focused on is, yeah, really just acknowledging the fact that communities, like we should trust communities more, and we should understand like the barriers to, you know, eating healthy are more just about, yeah, limited time, access to resources. And I think for us, you know, it's you know, it is a difference of just like, we can put all this healthy food in a box, we can donate it to different avenues, but it doesn't necessarily change like all of the surrounding, you know, structures that someone's just trying to live through to get through the day. And so, yeah, I think again, through like trying to infuse everything with these types of dialogues, you know, I'm not working on anywhere near the same scale as Kristen or Jessica, but we're working really deeply like within our community and kind of like within a network of communities, so that it's like every vegetable that goes through our CSA network, you know, is more of an invitation. It's not just like the product where someone can take it or leave it. Like everything kind of like stokes the curiosity. And we feel like if every vegetable can basically lead you into some sort of wormhole where there's lots of different nodes of interaction, and sort of like this choose your own adventure where like stories start unfolding. Yeah, I think it just, like you were asking in the beginning, like so much of like our visceral experience of food and how we take care of ourselves is not about just that nutrition information on the box. It's about like how it made us feel, and all of those things are really substantive. And so I think if we can get to some of that heart, we can affect that slow change, but just meet people where they're at. If soda tastes good, like start with that. Don't lose them just by, you know, trying to really dismantle their whole, you know, sense of, you know, what's delicious in one shot.
Yeah, that's very much true. And thank you for sharing that. And one of the things that I was told by a chef here in Sacramento that I have high regards for, Mr. Patrick Mulvaney. He's the father of the Farmtofork movement in the whole Sacramento region, which is now the self-proclaimed Farmtofork capital of America. He said that the one thing that we have to look at is the way that organizations are able to feed people. The most important thing is for us to be able to feed individuals. And what is that product that we are providing to feed those individuals? And I think you just touched base regarding our kale and our leafy green comparison. It's the fact that, you know, collards have seen, or I mean, we can touch a little bit on that, but I'd like to hear a little bit more from perhaps Kristen and Jessica as far as what policy is doing, because I know in the past a lot of products, even vegetables, have been marginalized to the point to where they're coming from underserved communities, impoverished communities. And those particular products are seen by the general public or by the general population as ingredients that are less than what we should be consuming, because they are being it's ethnic to a specific area. Like you said, it comes from a can. We don't want to try that. So I'd like to probably hear from Jessica and Kristen, and we'll turn it back to Ghee in just a little bit. How does policy plays a role in introducing different types of products to the general population? I'd like to probably hear a little bit from that, either Jessica or Kristen.
You want me to start, Kristen? I can talk about some policy at the national level. So I think one thing I often think about when someone asks a question like that is, and Kristen Leach, you mentioned, again, our environment plays such a role, even when we're like quote unquote, like for me, if I'm trying my best to eat my healthiest, there's so many other factors that play into that. So two things that come to mind around policy. One is we have subsidized food in the US when it comes to what farmers are helped to get supported to plant. And that feeds into what has become accessible when the government has boxes that it is supporting or covering with SNAP application, SNAP food stamps. Like there are certain foods that do and do not apply. So there's a whole system as we think about the supply chain of food coming into all communities that is influenced and driven by policy. And so as we make national policy changes, that can have an amazing influence in really positive ways or negative ways, depending on how it goes, on what folks not only have access to, but the amount of certain crops that we produce that, again, influence so much. What are the ingredients that then make up the fast food products or whatever we might be talking about? The other policy, which I think about as well, is more recent, and that is the expansion of SNAP application locations for SNAP access. So myself, I was a SNAP participant when I was in graduate school, despite working 5 jobs, right? Like, I mean, people are really trying to pull things together and still there's a need and eligibility for food stamps. And so when I was on SNAP, it was during a period of time when some policy changes had happened where I could go to corner stores and there was the promotion of produce being in stocked in those stores more frequently, which was great because if I lived on the south side of Chicago where there were fewer grocery stores, but we had a lot of corner stores. So there was, again, more of an access point for me to access more, again, traditionally what we say healthy food. I think there, though, is opportunity for, as we engage more closely with our communities and listen and adjust, to ensure that there's also more variety of food in those retail settings. And we're not relegating quote unquote ethnic food to one aisle. And, we all can have value in much more diversity. I think about bananas. In the US, I think we usually have one banana, but there's like hundreds of varieties of bananas that we know that South Americans eat. Like, why are we stuck with one banana? So anyways, policy at the national level and local level and how it influences us is just very powerful in a lot of different ways. But Kristen, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, or the other Kristen and G too, you may have thoughts on that too, being your farmers. So.
I'd love to add on to that. So one, when you mentioned policy, my first thought was like internal food bank policy. So I love how Jessica took the really broad perspective. And then I'm thinking, okay, how does our food bank policy related to like pounds and cost of food affect the types of food that we're distributing? There's a lot of food banks have formal nutrition policies where they have worked with all of their donor outlets, whether it is the Emergency Food Assistance Program through USDA, or it is your local Kroger, we have Krogers here, grocery store, and they're passing along the food that they can't sell because it's going to expire in a few days. Some food banks have worked with all of their donors to determine like what is healthy and what is left over, and all of those things will add up to determine what we're getting. I love you brought up SNAP, Jessica. Within our community, we have got a program called Wholesome Wave that is building relationships with non-traditional food suppliers to accept SNAP dollars. So things like farmers markets, who generally your first thought is like, oh, that's going to be the expensive place to get produce. But a lot of farmers markets here are now accepting SNAP dollars. And what they do is they will double your dollar if you're able to use SNAP. So you can get double the amount of produce for half the price. Yes.
That's awesome. Well, we're getting some questions from our audience here, and I just want to throw that out there really quick. What are some effective ways to communicate the importance of culturally appropriate food to funders and donors, and how can we explain it's more than just access?
So I can speak to that, and I'm loving hearing from the other panelists too. So I'll make this brief. I'll put in the chat a section of the nutrition food banking toolkit that we just created, and it's about how to talk to donors on this very thing. I think it again all comes back to stories. And we are all people, and even if we're working with corporate America and we're a small nonprofit or whatever it may be, like we need to acknowledge those power dynamics, but also like push against them and recognizing that ultimately it comes down to we have a relationship with a donor who's a person, and we're trying to hopefully collectively work for the betterment in serving our neighbors, experiencing food insecurity in our case. So the toolkit I'll share kind of has some tactical tactics about how to go about that. I think one thing that we've heard from food banks, which is really helpful, is providing individual dashboards that show here's the percentage or the pounds, number of pounds of food that you're donating to us. Thank you, that's great. And here's the breakdown of what is nutritious based on, we have a ranking system that we have adopted called the Healthy Eating Research Nutrition Guidelines. But also, if a food bank is serving their community, they can also put in that dashboard, here are the foods that you're donating that meet the food needs and preferences of our neighbors. That story around data can't be refuted and is very powerful in helping your partner, who's the donor, talk to also their higher ups to make some of those policy changes. So I'll again post it in the chat for folks who are interested.
Thank you very much for that. And I think it all comes down to us and what the stories that we have behind us. But I have a quick question for Ghee here, which is, what inspired to open? This is another question from the audience. And what inspired your farm, MOA Farms, to get started? And also, how can we amplify the work that many small farmers are doing so that the same are able to have a more diverse food?
Well, I don't know if I can really answer that, but I mean, as a farmer, we try to get across people that this is a culturally things, but like Kristen said earlier, we want to be at homes. So I guess being a farmers, we want to share our produce with other people. But at the same time, I really see the difference, how the like Jessica was mentioning, how the bigger the U.S. feed America, the upper people made the umbrella, the law, and they apply to local people, and how everybody was involved in the whole community. So for me as a farmer, I share what I grow for other people, but at the same time, this SNAP program coming to the farmers market. And I noticed that what Kristen said earlier is that the SNAP program actually for half of the price. So once the market that I participate in the Bay Area actually match the SNAP, like if you spend $10, the market give you $10, which is $20. And that really stress the buying power. And they get to experience more different varieties of produce, which I can see the difference between people getting a lettuce, which is really common. Everybody know what lettuce is, but if they come to my booth and they see a lettuce, and they say, "Oh, we got lettuce, but what's that?" And I have a special Asian crops like water spinach. It's also another lettuce vegetable, but a lot of people don't understand that. It's a different look, but it tastes almost identical like lettuce. You can just toss it, vinegar, whatever dressing you put it in. You can even put in your sandwich. And yeah, if you can't get the lettuce, you still get my water spinach. It's still the same. I think that culturally, everybody benefit from each piece of the farmer, but also the organization, the customers. And it helps us to eat what we like. We don't have to buy the same thing, but try different things, but at the same time, the result is healthy eating.
Was that one of the inspirations for starting up your business, or what Moa Farms is now?
Yes, I wanted to. I only grow what I eat, so I would still produce that I eat only. I don't grow produce that I don't know. I don't cook, so that way I don't have to search for a story how to make up a recipe. I only grow vegetable that I know in the back of my mind. I don't have to look. I don't have to write. I know exactly what I need to do with it. So that's part of me, trying to grow things that I love to eat and share with everybody.
And thank you for that. And that is exactly, I think, why we have such a beautiful area where we can grow the products, and why we, as a restaurant, we are very proud to be able to work with the local suppliers, the local producers, our local ranchers, and the farmers market really plays a role in our organization in order to provide access, not necessarily access to food, but be able to support a lot of the local farmers that are in the area where we live. So, I mean, Kristen, Leach, as far as any inspiration for your farm and how the culturally appropriate food plays a role, I mean, what can you tell us a little bit? I mean, can you speak a little bit about those experiences that you probably feedback from any of the farmers markets or any other organizations that you work with?
Sure, yeah. And I mean, I would just say, like, if anyone's ever seen Ghee's stall at the farmer's market, like, you know how alluring it is, and you see all of this beautiful produce laid out. And if you have 5 minutes to just like ask Ghee a question, like, you're gonna end up standing at their stall for the next hour, you know, because you get to learn so much. You get so drawn into kind of, if you're not familiar with those vegetables, getting, recipes and, how to prepare them. And I think the service that Ghee is doing in terms of meeting people to be able to approximate, like, oh, well, if you like this lettuce, like, why not eat water spinach? If you look at what's upstream, like, so instead of just looking at access as a consumer, like, if consumers gain more knowledge about like more diversity in these crops, it helps us unwind a lot of the biodiversity that's been lost, because we've ended up with this really kind of bottlenecked view of what is nutritious. We've exported really flawed versions of nutrition to lots of parts of the rest of the world, like all throughout Asia and Africa and Central America, like this Western notion of what a healthy diet is. So we send like fortified, like grains back, and we really diminish like the biodiversity of all these different heritage crops that have been stewarded for much longer and have been really localized diets that coincide with crops that can thrive in, really good, sound agroecological models. And so I think in those conversations at a farmer's market, what it means when we take that back to the field is if we can have people expand their horizons a little bit, or if we can like reintroduce crops that maybe people have been separated from for like a generation or so, right? Like, there's been lots of disruptions to people having a consistent thread of just how knowledge is passed on through their families or communities. If we can help reconcile some of those ruptures, I think for us as farmers, that means quite a great deal. Because one, we're in a hot, we're in the Central Valley. It's super hot. We can't grow brassicas here through a big chunk of the season just because of, flea beetle pressure, and they end up doing poorly. But, amaranth is a staple crop in pretty much every corner of the world. And it's the bane of farmers' existence in the US, where we just basically call it pigweed. And it's one of the things that just drives me crazy, because in lots of parts of South America, in the Aztec Empire, it was like revered as like this kind of holy crop because it's a super nutritious green, like it has more iron and the seed is super protein rich. And it was just really demonized during colonization and like vehemently annihilated by the Spanish when they colonized the Americas. And now to have farmers calling it pigweed and kind of going after it with this, pure hatred, when it's a crop that just wants to grow here. It's one of the few crops that fixes carbon at a rate that's equal to grass family crops, right? So all of these things that are really promising in terms of agriculture, reversing some of the impacts of climate change, like if we had the slightest understanding of what so many cultures have known since ancient times, we doing something like rediversifying our gut flora as a species, but also just in terms of like what we're able to do in terms of some agronomy and diversifying the types of crops in our field, which, just like means we can have better practices, because relying on only a few handful of different types of leafy greens, that builds up soil pest and disease and all of these things if the only things we know how to eat as a green are brassica crops. Or Ghee talking about snake gourd and saying, look, if you like zucchini, you'll like snake gourd. Like that's great, because those types of gourds, thrive so much better. Like if you think about coming from Laos or Cambodia or Vietnam, like where all of these crops are native to, they are gonna love the heat. Like a zucchini is not the heat of the Central Valley through a lot of the season. So I think it benefits us, and that's what I'm really curious about as a farmer is how consumers expanding their horizons a little bit, how communities being able to preserve and perpetuate their cultural traditions that really rely on a lot more food crops than are the typical Western staples, really has a lot of strong environmental implications.
Amazing. Thank you very much for that. That's a lot of information and that's a lot of feedback, but that's content. That's what we want to hear. And I think this is, extremely important for us to know. One of the organizations that I'm associated with, it's Slow Food here in Yolo County. And slow food plays a big role in preserving the identity of the different foods and honoring the different and the rich a heritage of the different foods that are grown in the area. So one of the questions that we're getting from here from attendees is, how do you think higher education? I think you just touched base on a lot of different well, a few different topics here, but I really like the fact that when you talked about the carbon sequestration and how can we utilize plants? How can we utilize the systems that we have, or how can we utilize the ingredients that are currently growing in order to bring a broader knowledge to the public? How can we create a better impact with ingredients that we grow in order to be, again, culturally appropriate, but also how can we help to preserve the soil? Because we know that in order to have healthy food, healthy ingredients, we need to have those healthy soils first. So the question that we're receiving from our audience is, how do you think higher education systems can promote culturally appropriate foods? If you can speak and if you can speak to those experiences. I mean, Kristen or Jessica, I think, I know you mentioned a little bit of that and going through school, but on the different studies that have been conducted, I mean, either Jessica or Kristen, can you tell us a little bit, I mean, how do you think higher education systems can promote culturally appropriate food? And if you can speak a little bit to those experiences.
Sure. So I am going to take off my knowledgeable hat and just tell you as a person what I think it is. And that is, again, I'm not a registered dietitian, I'm a social worker as I come to this work. But from what I know of my registered dietitian colleagues, you learn a very specific science when it comes to, nutrition in the United States. And it's problematic, in my opinion. It is very much a white Eurocentric lens. And so that is what gets perpetuated. Now, there are some amazing RDs who I've started to follow on Instagram and things, one of which is in Canada. And she is a Black woman who essentially has said, we need to throw this whole registered dietitian kind of lens that has been promoted on its head and start flipping it around, starting with dignity. And understanding people's kind of culture and history with food, because again, I don't have the science all around it. So someone else may know here, but I can imagine knowing my own body that there are certain things that I digest super well and love and know that my body is liking. And when I think about my family's history, maybe that's why. But those things have not always been accessible to me. I also, so that's one thing. The other thing I know when I do have my Feeding America hat on is when we've talked to healthcare providers and physicians in particular, they at most have one nutrition class as part of their training. Yet they are talking about people's health and wellness and how we can, thrive as human beings. And it's not just about Western medication, right? There's so much more Eastern medication and ways of thinking about them, food, like just overall mental health that we are now hopefully talking about more with the pandemic. So as I think about training for physicians and those who are in power and trusted folks who people listen to when it comes to health, we also have to change what we're training there. And then I think back to preschool and kindergarten. How are we teaching kids and engaging them in farming and production of food so that there's an awareness? And that's, again, where I look to the rest of you, because I'm sure you have some really great recommendations.
Kristen, Elliott here, is there anything that you'd like to share with us there?
Yes, I just want to say thanks to Jessica for bringing up the curriculum that we as registered dietitians is our foundation. I completely agree with you. And like, we have one class on cultural competence, and there's such a huge difference between cultural competence and like, I know this culture eats this, versus culture humility, where you come to the table with the concept that you don't know everything about them and you are open to learning more about the specific niches that can, like I said before, can be different across the street from each other, not just in different countries or different cities. One thing for me, and this is personal, I grew up in South Georgia in a really small town, predominantly white people. And when I moved to Atlanta to go to school, my perspective changed. And I feel like that is a huge component to be able to like develop cultural humility, is to think, okay, so the way I've always seen things has been this one little narrow view. And there are so many different other ways that food is grown, people prepare food, and just so many new things to understand. So if you find yourself thinking one way, you should ask yourself, like, why do I think this way? Or what does my, neighbor sitting across the cubes think about this? Where did they come from? Like, were they born here? Or where did their grandparents come from? Like, we are all informed by our experiences. So we can all benefit from a little change of perspective.
Thank you for that. Well, thank you. I remember one of the conversations that you mentioned and about the different types of foods that are grown in the area and how those foods are associated. I remember you sharing, or Kristen sharing, a story about a pear tree that you had in the back of your house, which I thought it was pretty funny. But I think we have all seen that. And Ghee had mentioned, what is the difference between just a regular lettuce here, and what is the difference between an iceberg lettuce that we're doing that. So I don't know if you want to touch a little bit on that, Kristen.
Yeah, thanks for tying that back in. We were talking about what our food culture is and like where we came from and how foundational that was for us as individuals. And I grew up in a food insecure household in rural South Georgia. So I went to the church food pantries, and my parents were the ones who were judging other people because they had their nails done or they were carrying a fancy bag. So that's my history. So I've had to do a lot of individual work to understand where all of that came from. But yes, so the story was we rented a house at one point, and it was the very first house that I lived in. I lived in trailers up until that point. So I was like super proud of this house that we lived in, but there was a pear tree in the yard, and I noticed it. I was like, okay, cool. Those are pears. And I would see them fall on the ground and they would rot and they just sat there. And it never occurred to me that I could eat those pears because all of the food that we ate came from cans. So I knew that we would make our little pear salad that came from a can with some cottage cheese and some like a cherry on top. And I don't know where that came from, but it was always from a can, and it just never occurred to me that I could have eaten those pears in the yard. So like, that's another example of perspective.
Yeah, I know that it happens a lot, especially when we're visiting some of the stores or some of the ingredients that we're not often used to using. But we're getting a couple additional questions in here, and as well, and we're going to just throw it around the room in here. Do you think we can look to Western diet as a root cause of so many of our health challenges these days, like autoimmune, cancer, etc.? If so, what can we do? We're going to get more into the health aspect of things, and I think it's a very important question here.
So I can jump in as a start. With full disclosure, I'm not a medical provider or a nutritionist, but I would say in my own lived experience that I've had a lot of, and I know this is like statistically true, a lot of folks in their 20s and 30s have a lot of GI issues. And so they're tracking it back to, well, what did we start growing up with? What was our food environment? And it was a lot of processed foods. And I know my parents' generation, that was the first generation of like TV dinners. So I, yes, believe that food that grows from the ground is amazing for our bodies. That is not probably the largest percentage of food that most Americans eat. We also know that the dietary guidelines that the USDA has put out, the average American does not meet those dietary standards, and they're not the most strict dietary standards. So when I think about my own life and my own health, I'm genetically, due to my parents, like a very small framed person, but that does not also mean that I'm a healthy person when you look inside. So we have a lot of work to do in our culture when it comes to body shaming, when it comes to understanding and thinking about what is healthy, and understanding and looking to our histories when it comes to what happened in the United States, right? This was a country that was colonized. Native Americans' food environment and food ways were completely stripped. We heard from Kristen earlier about what has happened with other crops being, demonized, and how that has influenced our biodiversity in our world. Those are all things that are damaging our planet, that I can only know in my own heart and body that that's damaging us as humans and our health. Now, on top of that and separate from that is also how we've structured our environment. So we know that folks' health, actually the majority of one's health outcomes are determined by their zip code. That's not because of some magic thing, but it's because of a structure and in a thoughtful environment that was built to de-invest and disinvest from certain communities and have perpetuated harms that have led to disproportionate impacts of health outcomes, particularly of people of color. And so those are things that we can change in the shorter term through policy as we're thinking about that. And then I think in a longer term is how do we rebuild the soil and the land that we have, that white folks, colonizers originally on, and that we've continued to harm and kind of leave us. But that's again where I'll look to the farmers to know how do we do that and what's the trajectory there.
Right. Well, we have another question where there's limited access to culturally appropriate food. For example, with food banks and food distribution for food insecure residences, and like you mentioned, Jessica, it's being appropriate to those specific zip codes. The end result being more food waste, which is something that we have to be aware of that happens. How are different food banks addressing those issues? Kristen, perhaps that's a really good question for you, and we can turn it back to one of our farmers as well and see how that particularly affects some of their farms. But Kristen, if you can probably give us a little bit of feedback or on that particular question.
Can you clarify the question? I understood there was something about food waste.
Sorry, there's the question is, there's limited access to culturally appropriate food with food banks and food distributions for food insecure residences. And this results in more food waste. I mean, can you speak about how the food banks throughout are preventing this particular issues from happening? How are we securing perhaps a culturally appropriate food for different demographics?
Yeah, first I want to speak from the perspective of a pantry recipient. So I think we don't give enough credit to our individual community members and how they take the food that they receive and they either use it or they share it. So it doesn't necessarily end up in the garbage if someone doesn't get something that they don't know how to use. There is such a huge trade system between community members knowing, hey, I've got a sweet potato. Do you have a can of beans? And that's a big component of reducing food waste from the individual community perspective. There are some food pantries who are putting into place a share table concept. So if the pantry doesn't operate on a client choice model where people can come shop and choose the foods that they take, they can search their food box that they've received that's pre-packed, and they can take out the items that they don't want and they can place them on the share table for someone else to pick up. As well as oh, well, I didn't like this corn, but someone put these beans down, so I'll pick that up and replace it for myself. From a larger food bank perspective, I don't have a good answer from around food waste. I know that there are food banks, I will say in California on the West Coast, who are a little bit more woke, for lack of a better word, are doing a lot of composting and paying attention to how they are tossing the food that they're not using or the food that may go bad in their inventory before they can distribute it. But for us here in Atlanta, we don't have any policies in place around that. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, so it was something that was thrown out there by some of our the audience. And I mean, I don't know how everyone feels about taking a little short break here, maybe 10-15-minute break, and then we can continue a conversation in about 2:50 or so, if everybody feels okay with that, or just gonna continue. So we'll convene back in 10 minutes, if that's okay with everyone. Yep, thank you. Hello and welcome back to our culturally appropriate food panel. We've been having a discussion with our panelists here, Ms. Jessica Hagger, who is the Director of Healthcare at Feeding America, Ms. Ghee from MOA Farms. We have Kristen Leach, who owns a farm here in Winters, California. Kristen Elliott, visiting from Atlanta, serves for the community food banks. And we want to make sure that we're able to welcome everyone back. We want to have a discussion, and we've been engaging in a discussion about a culturally appropriate food. What is it, and what does it? Why does it matter? So, and with that conversation, we wanted to continue the topic in here, and we wanted to talk a little bit more about. We were discussing as we broke out for a little break here about health and the role that the foods that we produce and eat and are able to receive play a role in our lives, and the different types of ethnic foods that we can find. But not only that, the different types of culturally appropriate foods, and how do they play a role in our everyday eating, in the health and the impact that it plays within our culture. So we want to just talk a little bit more and continue perhaps health equity. I know, Jessica, your Feeding America plays a big role in that. I mean, is there anything that you could probably touch base a little bit when it comes into health equity? I know that you, in one of the conversations, you mentioned a little bit about capacity building and community building. Can you talk a little bit about that and how the culture appropriate foods play a role with that?
Sure, absolutely. So as part of what we call our nutritious food revisioning work, so again, this paradigm shift that we're working on with food banks, my wonderful colleague, Tracy Simmons, she's a public health professional. She's been running a health equity training series for food banks this year, just again, to not only help us at the national organization, but also for food banks to understand more about what it means when we say health equity in food banking. What does that work look like? Everything from community engagement and research to, again, the specific programs or strategies used. Health equity, of course, is a huge body of work and a perspective as we think about that. And so we're trying to figure out what is our unique role as part of the charitable food system and where we can have the most impact when it comes to engaging with communities on understanding and then addressing health inequities that exist. So I'll just note that. And then we have a great strategic capacity building team that works with food banks on everything from implementation of nutrition strategies to fundraising to sourcing strategies. So as that work grows around capacity building, again, that's where we see our unique role as a national organization in supporting food banks to continue on in that work. I will note that all of this is done in a way that is extremely interdepartmental and cross with partners. So whether that be working with farmers and learning from farmers, working with food banks and learning from food banks, communities, donors, we really see ourselves as a hub of a sponge of learning, and then how we can turn that around to best serve and work with communities and food banks.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think one of the important things for us to understand is the role that within our organizations we play. How can we make individuals better understand, or just sort of the general population, when it comes either to participating in a farmer's market or talking to different individuals and making them understand the importance of this culturally appropriate foods that we eat and the diversity of products that we grow. I know that Ghee was mentioning here a little bit about the different products that they grow and how those are displayed. Is it more of the education that comes down to teaching the particular communities that we work with? Is there some additional work that we can better do in order to educate our community more? Kristen Leach, I know that you're pretty good advocate about the different types of foods and understanding kind of where the food comes from and how do they get to the end of the table. Is there something that you can tell us a little bit more here that we can do to further the education when it comes down to the general public and helping us build a better community for us to be able to accept the type of food that we grow in the area?
Sure, yeah. I want to touch on a little bit about what Kristen and Jessica both said. Kristen a little before the break of just, I think that, several years ago, Alameda County had contacted me to look at, recent immigrants and resettled refugees were really under-enrolled in SNAP. And so people wanted to know, what's the disconnect? So we can enact all these policy levers to kind of have these different programs available to the public, but sometimes they're just not getting a ton of traction and actual engagement. And where is the gap? And I think one, a lot of those systems are just really hard to navigate, even with as much translation has happened to different languages as possible. Usually it requires someone sitting down with someone to go through the paperwork, navigating the system, all of those things. And I think too, just to say that, as much as we can open the doors and welcome everybody, I think communities have their own really discrete ways of having informal networks to kind of deal with food insecurity. And as Kristen said, there's a lot of sharing that happens. So when we reached out to lots of communities, it's I know just from growing up, I don't know that my parents would have felt comfortable going to a government program or being seen at a food bank, but I know we went to our church and that's where it was comfortable because everyone was kind of on the same level of just not having a stigma associated with it. It was just more oh, everybody's here and everybody can share. And so I think what everyone's talked about here, just the nature of needing to be highly collaborative is really important, just because we can't have a mass answer or a totally centralized sense of just how everybody is going to receive these services. Just because no matter how accessible we make it, it just may not be the flavor that's comfortable to someone. That's not just about who works there or whatever, but just kind of, just the shame that I think a lot of people feel of just, the culture here of rugged independence and how you provide for your family. And I think that's a lot to unwind across any culture and across any experience, just what that feels like. And so I think, what excites me most is just knowing all the people that are doing that work in their respective communities and how to, just connect through that. So when we donated a lot of produce through the years, some of it did go through our food banking system, but a lot of it went to Asian Women's Shelter, who works directly with survivors of domestic violence. And it went through, Korean churches, just because that's more likely where people are going to go, or where community members know just each other's business. So who needs the extra bag of rice, who needs like a little bit more vegetables to get through the next couple months. So I think that you can't underestimate that trust. And so it's about, for me, thinking about how, private and public partnerships can work, and me as a small business owner can work with institutions like the food bank to just kind of like spread it out in a way where, people's entry point is most likely someone that's just going to make them feel comfortable, and someone who they can relate to, like they might be in the same boat the next week.
I'd love to add on to that.
Individuals in particular, like we work with this really amazing chef and nutritionist named Eileen Suzara, and she has a food concept called Sariwa Fresh, and she's working. She has a master's in public health, and works with lots of different parts of the Filipino community, specifically around like food as medicine. And so I'm nowhere near a nutritionist. Like I grew up on Long Island, like I ate a lot of pizza. That's like my comfort food. So I am not one to understand a healthy gut biome. But Eileen Suzar is a really great resource. And Rupa Maria, who's a doctor, I think at UCSF, also wrote a really terrific book that, again, is super intersectional, looking at just kind of like agriculture and food security, and just in a way of looking at its impacts on human health. So those are just things, I could put those in the chat just for people to look to in terms of further resources.
Yes, if you could please share that, that would be awesome. And thank you for sharing that. Kristen, Elliott, I know that you had a couple comments in there. Please feel free to chime in.
Yes, I'm sorry. I thought you were finished, Kristen. I did not mean to jump in there. I'm thinking about education, that part of the question, and it's extremely important to make sure that from a programmatic perspective, make sure that your partners, so for us, our partners are our food distributing partners, whether they are pantries or after school programs or child daycares where they utilize the food that they get from us to serve people. They need to know who they are serving. So they may have a concept, an idea, it's like, okay, we serve Mexican people, but actually that's often used as a very broad term to just completely define a population that is so diverse. So partners need to know who they're serving, and they need to know how it's different from other cultures. We also need to make sure our donors, our community supporters, our volunteers know who we're serving. So we've been utilizing social media to acknowledge different cultural heritage months. And we have a really wide reach because we're big, we're a really big food bank. So we've been teaching the broader community about the specific needs that the Latino culture is experiencing around food insecurity, and what the barriers look like and how we can meet those in a different way. And then another way to think about it is to, well, from the education standpoint, is to, a very easy first step is to think about holidays. So we are a way to kind of like bridge the gap between sourcing and, for instance, like partner relations, which is the team that I'm on. We are the first line of communication with our partners and with the community members. So our sourcing team, who is choosing the food that we're going to distribute, is disconnected. They don't always get to hear the stories or the questions, and it doesn't always make it down the pipeline. So an easy way to sort of nudge our sourcing team in a direction to choose more culturally responsive foods is to highlight holidays. So an example of that would be, we always get a ton of turkeys around Thanksgiving and Christmas because that's a widely accepted holiday and you eat turkey for those holidays. So if we were to acknowledge holidays across other cultures and understand the types of cultural foods that they may be eating, we could potentially source only around the holiday. Can we just start there and source only around the holiday, and then be able to provide our neighbors with the things that they like around their specific holidays, for lack of a better word. So it really is about education and letting everyone know this is who we're serving. This is the type of food that they like. If you're a donor and you're donating food, maybe you could choose something different or go to a specific cultural store instead of the Kroger and pick up some food that you might take to a local pantry to donate.
And if I could build on that, because I love this part of the conversation when the question around education is raised, I think about my own shift in that thinking, because when I first, I was someone who went to, school for, 20 years, right? And so it was always about, oh, higher education, like that's the stamp of approval. And so I came into my work prior to food banking and in food banking thinking, how can I educate the end user so that the result or outcome is achieved? And I've been humbled in that perspective and realizing it is not about how can you end user be educated. Yes, there might be elements of that, just like how I learned about mixed greens, and that was great. But there's so much more that needs to be done so that we don't point fingers. And again, that paternalism is so harmful. And already, if you're experiencing food insecurity, that's a lot of toxic stress that one is experiencing. So I would challenge us that if we're thinking about how to be more culturally inclusive, that we think about what is it within our system that we should change, and what's, again, a first step. So you, Kristen, Elliott said something great, like let's start with holidays and thinking about that. So again, that's just from my own journey of like, oh, the light bulb went off, of course, like let's not think about how can so-and-so be educated for the outcome, but what can I do to change my system, my biases, my way of that I've been doing work, because there's a lot of harm that I unintentionally have caused and probably still am causing that I'm trying to change so that, again, hopefully achieving the same outcome or even stronger outcome around that.
Thank you very much. I think that's so important. In order for the different organizations that we all play our individual roles with, it's who is sitting around the table that are eventually making the decisions for a larger population that we are serving, and what are the effects that the particular decisions that we make will have, and what is the impact that we want to create. But I think by looking at food from a different lens that we've been as the discussion has been happening here, we can have a better understanding and a little more empathy for the individual, getting rid of some of the different biases that are around that are in food that exist within our own communities and around the food that we eat. But I think this is such a rich conversation in order to bring all those different elements in speaking about food and speaking about what we have in our own individual areas and how this affects the different demographics that we have throughout the United States. And I'm really thankful that we're being able to have those conversations here. I'd like to hear probably just a little bit more from Kristen here, as Leach, as far as the different ideas that you can have or that you have faced in your different in the area that you're in that can again help a lot more individuals in our particular area that perhaps can serve as a playbook that can be utilized in different regions. Any ideas here?
Sure, and I'm not sure if Gee's here too, because she's also in the shared valley, and she might have some idea. Oh, okay, can't see Ghee.
Ghee, I think we have your video might be off here, but we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, you see now? Okay.
There she is. Welcome back. We can see you now.
It's my daughter's computer, so I'm trying to figure out how thing is.
We really appreciate the fact that you're able to be here with us and join us. And thank you very much for that in advance. We were Ghee, we were talking about the different ideas. I mean, working together and then working on collaborative programs that have impact in our individual communities. Are there any programs that have worked that you see that can be utilized in different parts of as we are in a national panels that can be utilized in different areas that you have seen that have had impact in your specific line of work?
I think I had seen a role model things as a farmers participate in the farmers market. I see that lots of chefs come to the market and get the farmers market and buy various different kinds of produce. And what these chefs tell their customer is that they get the produce from the local farmers market. And then that tells the story. So the customer come to shop and wonder what's going on, why the chef is shopping at the local farmers market. So I have seen that, but I was really surprised to see a lot of chefs in the Bay Area does that. And then I saw you Wednesday farmers market, the capital. So I was really happy that you one of those chefs. So I was really happy to see you.
Thank you.
I don't really get to see a lot of chefs here in Sacramento area, but I see a lot in the Bay Area. So that's another story that educating, like higher educating, but doing the actual work and telling your people that you're getting the produce from your local people, farmers. And then this really tells the whole story for your customer. And then another example is that I have customers and older generation people come and shop at the farmers market. I presume I'm the only, or maybe some exception, that organic. A lot of vegetables, Asian vegetables, they're not certified. So I'm pretty sure I'm one of the couples that really organic certified. And for the last 10 years that I was at the farmers market, I see all these come by my vendors and look at me like, oh, so you're here, so you're organic. And then along as the year progress, I see they tell the story, like they tell their daughter, their son, their cousin to come and shop. And now I have a whole bunch of people that know who I am, but at the same time, they tell their friends, say, oh, we go there and get vegetables. So that is an educating thing, but it takes time to build that in. But I was really impressed. I think these are the two things that I really see in vision, the difference between educating. Like you mentioned earlier, we can lots of training and teaching, but a lot of people like myself, illiterate, we don't really read. So we see what we do. We don't really follow the small print. I presume I'm one of those people that don't really follow the little print. You know, I like the big picture, the hands-on things. So that's one of the things I see the difference.
Correct.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I think the word of mouth is really good just because like we host a lot of farm tours. We do a lot of education with grade school kids. And I think, yeah, just that representation of like for a lot of kids, like when they picture a farmer in the US, like I don't look like what they probably pictured in their mind. But to have somebody that's kind of growing things that they're like, hey, wait, like my aunt makes a pickle with that type of radish and not the other types. And like I do think it ends up spilling over where then they can tell their parents. And then, maybe that family that doesn't typically think like, oh, I'm going to go shop at the farmer's market, like feels a little bit more inclined to. So I think, yeah, nothing can really beat building that kind of one-on-one connection. We did a program with UC Davis to try to diversify what foods were available in their student pantry. So working with a student farm to kind of select seeds and grow more things at their farm, different Asian crops, and then kind of translate that through the student pantry. So we did a program that was just a challenge through a couple different schools in California called like the ramen hack. And it was just to take something that you got at the local Asian market in Davis, you know, like a pack of ramen is like 80 cents basically. And what are the types of things that you can add to that? That is just a really low barrier way to say, like, you don't have a kitchen, you just have a hot pot, you don't have a lot of time, and you don't have a lot of money. So yeah, eat the instant ramen, but what are ways you tweak that little flavor pack so it's not just, you know, just the pure salt and MSG? And what are, you know, especially herbs are so nutrient dense. And I think in the West, you think of an herb as just a garnish. And in a lot of cultures, herbs are eaten like just by the fistful, basically. And that's, you know, again, as nutritious as a whole head of broccoli or a whole bunch of kale. And so I think it was really fun to see that too, just for people to get to try to introduce different vegetables, but again, in a very low barrier way that wasn't saying like, let's start a from scratch meal, but just what are really easy ways to already work with where you're at, but also get really interested in this kind of like science fair format of just like, what does this vegetable lend to this little bowl of soup? And then I think just the challenge was on social media. And I think that, of course, just kind of fuels, especially younger generations, to kind of just post a picture, explain their little ramen hack, and just have the sharing kind of happen that way.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think in one of our conversations, one of the conversations that we've had, Kristen, Elliott, you mentioned one of the partnered food banks developing a program after working with an edible garden. We are very proud to have a edible food garden at City Hall at City Hall here in Woodland, California. So, it is a county seat. We're very, very proud of the different classes, about the different individuals that we're able to host, about the different collaborations that we had with different chefs. Is there anything that you can speak about at a national level where particular programs like edible food, edible gardens, or some type of communal gardens have played a role in the food that we're eating and introducing this culture appropriate foods? Does it give individuals more of a sense of belonging, if you have any experience with that? Or could you speak to anything like that happening at a national level? I guess a second part to the question would be, how can we fuel, or how can we start, if there is a way to start creating an incentive to introduce additional products? What are some of the strategies that we could perhaps use and pass on to our individual communities about creating awareness of this culture appropriate foods, and perhaps just food in general? I mean, because that's the first thing that we have to do. We have to eat, but specifically speaking, so we don't just lose sight of the question, the different programs that are based around edible gardens. I mean, how can we promote that a little bit more? Because we all have an understanding, once you grow a plant, a seedling, you're able to nourish that plant and you're able to grow some of the food. The pride it gives certain individuals. I know that for a fact, the fact that we're able to have our small little gardens and be able to consume some of the ingredients there, we're able to teach different individuals on how long can we grow our own food. So instead of giving some of the food, can we teach them to fish, so to speak? So can any of you talk a little bit about that and maybe some of the programs that are out there?
I'm not able to speak from a national standpoint, but specifically around cultural foods, the Northwest Arkansas Food Bank started at a teaching garden at their food bank in March of 2020, right as COVID was starting. But they developed a survey to ask their community what types of things they should grow. So they know that they're they're supplementing the shelf stable food that we all have across food banks. But they wanted to get an idea of like more from a produce standpoint, what types of things are going to be more interesting or suitable for your cultural needs. And I don't have like any final information on behalf of their program, but I do know that they distributed almost 4,000 pounds of produce to their partner agencies from their garden, and they're working on sourcing seeds that can fit more of the cultural food needs of their community. And from a not food banking standpoint, here in Atlanta, we have a program called the Global Growers Network, and it was developed in a community called Clarkston, Georgia, where a large portion of refugees are settled here in Georgia. And so that program, I actually had the opportunity to like be a farmhand for a summer with them. But they created their program because they wanted to be able to provide a work opportunity for refugees who may have come from an agrarian society, and they're now in this new country where they don't know what the soil is like, or they don't even know if they can find seeds that are relative to their experience. So with this program, they Global Growers trained the refugees to be able to grow food here and to grow their cultural foods while also getting them like Serve Safe certified. And then they're able to sell their products at the local farmers markets. So that's kind of twofold. We're supporting refugees across many diverse cultures, and then their produce, which is extremely diverse, is going to end up in the hands of community members through farmers markets.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a model, you know, Kristen and Ghee working as farmers and providing those particular ingredients, and then educating a lot of the different individuals in the area. And I think that's what really kind of builds a community and be able to provide the products that are available. And we're able to create a lot more of the awareness and within our own community as far as the products that we have available. But I know as we're reaching almost an end, we want to make sure that we have a couple of the closing remarks from anyone. Have any questions for the rest of the group? Anything that we'd like to contribute? As we have about 8 minutes here to go, so I just wanted to make sure that I leave it open for anyone who has any additional questions or feedback that we might want to cover.
Well, I'll just jump in. Oh, Kristen, do you want to go? Okay, I will just jump in. I noticed Kristen Elliott posted trauma-informed kind of care and work in the chat. So hopefully that made it through to folks. That was like on my little notes here to bring up the end. So I just think that that is something that the world of food banking and hopefully other sectors too have increasingly become more trained on and aware of and thinking about. I mean, the existence of food insecurity is a solvable social determinant of health. It should not exist, but it does because our lack of political will to change things, right, in our environment. And so that experience of food insecurity, as most folks may know or assume, is very traumatic. And so as we go through creating systems and programs, I think that is always something that we can think more about, is how do we not perpetuate harm in that? How do we have a lens of what they are calling trauma-informed, so that we are approaching this work, which is not historically always been done, but with a lot of dignity, co-creation, and recognizing that, and Kristen Leach, I think you spoke so clearly to this earlier, like there's some folks who don't engage in the charitable food sector because it hasn't historically facilitated a feeling of dignity. And people don't want to be seen in lines. People don't want to be treated as though they're less than. Kristen Elliott, you shared how, you're sharing your own parents' kind of stories of critique and such. I mean, those things are real. And so what can we do to bring awareness? And so again, thanks, Kristen, for raising that. Both Kristen's and my amazing, and Ghee is great to hear from you. But just, I think trauma-informed is such a fundamental element for all this work.
Thank you for that. I know that we haven't touched a lot on the subject of everything happening with COVID and the food and increased food insecurity and perhaps the lack of those products available due to the pandemic that we had last year. So, we want to make sure that we're aware and that we're able to offer the different resources as the food banks are able to offer their resources, and perhaps their work has, if not tripled, quadrupled as far as the different work that has happened out there, but so has the need. So before this session is over, I'd like to thank everyone for being able to participate here and to give us your feedback. You're invaluable to your organizations, and we can't thank you enough for continuing to make policy. Jessica, Kristen, for continuing to make sure that that is enforced. And both Kristen and Ghee, we can't thank you enough for growing the different foods and educating the individuals in our community to look at food through a different lens, to be respectful of those different cultures and the community that we live in, for also continuing to pave the road for all of us to be able to be aware and understand that other different ethnicities are in the area, and perhaps we can try a little bit more of those different foods that are at your different food stalls, and continue to support your business. And we look forward to continue to work with you and continue to enrich our individual communities. And again, we'd like to thank you for being here today. Kristen, Ghee, I don't know if as far as any closing remarks that you may have, we still have a couple minutes here available.
Well, I was just going to ask you, Juan, when we can look forward to maybe a bitter melon special at Savory Cafe from Ghee's Bitter Melon, or a delicious snake gourd dish. Just let me know. I'll definitely show up that weekend for.
The way that our motto at the restaurant is whatever comes in the front door, because produce always comes in the front door at Savory Cafe. That's what we have for special that day. So please feel free to come in, and we want to make sure that we're able to promote, and any type of collaboration as well, that we want to make sure that we have a restaurant. We work with different organizations. We work with a lot of nonprofit organizations in our area to help bring awareness, to help educate different individuals, and we see ourselves as a part of a community. We're not only a restaurant, we're part of the community, and we feel a responsibility to teach and educate our community as well. So that's our goal. So bring it. So Ghee, Miss Elliott, I don't know if any additional comments that you may have. We still have like a minute or two left. So if we're here, I can't thank you enough for being here and providing all this great information for everyone here today.
I just want to say, well, Miss Kristen Elliott mentioned about the pear, how she just open cans and get pear, and when she actually see the pear, she doesn't even know. My experience is I have customer coming to me and ask me what cucumber. Even I put the sign cucumber, they wonder what it's cucumber and what they're supposed to do with it. It never crossed my mind that nobody know what cucumber is, but a lot of people do not know what cucumber is. So I'm really amazed how educating and teaching are really opening the minds of other people to be aware of what the actual fruit and what's inside of a can is. So that's a big difference, that you can get a fresh one. That's how they look, and how they look in a can is a completely different. So it's awareness that it never crossed my mind, but as you come across these kinds of path, it made you appreciate that teaching and educating and become aware of produce and showing people it's one of the keys so that be aware of what they are looking at, so know better and have a better health for their family and their children. So it's a big thing that I really appreciate it. It just, from the bottom of my heart, it's like, first I didn't know, people didn't know, but now I understand how they not knowing. So I really appreciate it.
You're a rock star. You teach us every day, and I think just teaching individuals every single day. You have no idea the role that you play as a farmer with the different diverse groups and the different programs that you're both you and Kristen are working as well in bringing that diverse type of seeds and also keeping and growing the next generation of knowledge. And we really like to thank you for that.
Yeah, I would like to share it. It's one of the things.
Thank you.
Like Kristen Lee said, it's a culturally thing, but also spiritual thing. My parents brought seeds here. It's a thing that I want to continue with my lifetime and then probably to my kids. So it's a good thing.
And we thank you for that.
Uh-huh.
All right.
All right.
Well, thank you very much. Again, thank you for participating on this particular panel. Hopefully we give a better understanding of what culturally appropriate food and how does it play a role in our area. So thanks again for being here. We can't thank you enough and looking forward to continuing to work with you. Continue the hard work and keep on moving forward.
Okay, thank you.